as is the case with a lot of conversations I have, I recently found myself thinking about how that related to what it means to be a survivor of childhood trauma. And there was an aspect of it that I thought might be helpful for us to be able to talk about. Welcome, I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. So, in this conversation I was having with somebody, we were talking about the idea that ADHD is caused by trauma, or in particular, I believe childhood trauma. And I'm not here to really talk about whether that is true or not, whether I believe it's true, or even the idea of that so much. What I am here to talk about is how important it is to be able to, as a survivor, recognize the different pieces, the different symptoms that we have, and honor ourselves and what we need if there is something that can and should be diagnosed, and if there are interventions that might be needed or beneficial related to that diagnosis, and or even medications that could be beneficial associated with that diagnosis. And so I want to be very clear from the offset that there are absolutely people that have mental health diagnoses. I believe that there truly are mental health diagnoses that are important to be able to identify and treat. I also know, after doing this doing this work for so many years and knowing so many people that have been diagnosed with things that maybe were not really accurate, that it's important to have your own awareness of yourself and your struggles, and to be an advocate for yourself, and not just within the medical or mental health realm, but even within yourself. So in this conversation where we were talking about it, one of the things that came up was the idea of, and I wrote it down because I don't want to forget how to say it, rejection sensitive dysphoria. So we were talking about, that was a big part of our conversation. And what I think is so important, and I think often missing from when we look at symptoms associated with a diagnosis, is the origin, is what other factors are playing into this, because we are not just a being full of symptoms, right? We are a being with a lived experience of so many things, good and bad, that have an impact on us. And every day of our lives, we are more and more impacted. Sometimes the good can kind of neutralize the bad. Sometimes the bad can overpower the good. But every day there are things happening in our life that are reinforcing, oftentimes, if you haven't yet done much healing, the difficulties of what it means to be a survivor. And so if you have been following any sort of social media around mental health or ADHD, if you read much related to mental health, you have likely seen a huge increase over the last, couple years, few years maybe, of a lot of people talking about ADHD. I mean, there are so many coaches that I'm seeing that are ADHD coaches, and helping other people that they believe have ADHD. And while I do believe, without a doubt, that ADHD is real, my son actually, when he was in 4th grade, was diagnosed. And at that time, I don't remember where I was in my journey. I still had more healing to do, I know that, but I can't remember if I was a therapist or not. I believe that I was, but and he took medication, and it really made a difference for him. So I believe that it's real. So I want to be clear about that. I also know that there are a lot of symptoms, quite a few symptoms associated with ADHD that are also symptoms of somebody that may not have ADHD but has experienced childhood trauma. And potentially maybe not experienced childhood trauma. But because symptoms fit in a particular category does not automatically mean that that person has that diagnosis. Because there are not just certain symptoms that you have to fit or that can be associated with it. There's other things that go into a truly accurate diagnosis. But what I think is most important about this is that no matter what that mental health diagnosis is, whether it is ADHD or autism or depression or PTSD or an eating disorder or whatever else it might be, if you've experienced childhood trauma, part of your journey of getting to where you want to be, to reduce the symptoms, to feel better, to be able to create the life that you want, part of your journey is going to require you to address and heal the childhood trauma. Because while the symptoms may overlap, treating the symptom with a specific intervention or a medication isn't going to heal the wound that was left by the trauma. And what I am seeing happen, just based on different videos I've seen, people talking about this, and even in the conversation that I had, is that when we're struggling, we naturally want a reason, right? Like we want to be able to very easily recognize, okay, this is why I'm struggling this way, and here's what I can do about it. I want to fix this. And even for people that have come to me recognizing that they have childhood trauma and they want to heal, it's often still like, okay, tell me what to do. I'm going to do it. How often do I need to do it? Like they want to fix it immediately, which makes sense. Why wouldn't you want to? And so what happens is that people will search for a diagnosis that has an intervention or a medication that can go along with it to help lessen that symptom, to fix that symptom. And while something, whether it's an intervention or a medication, may be able to help to a degree, you're not going to be able to get to the place that you want to get to because this wound, this gaping wound, is still over here, not getting any attention, not getting any wound care, not getting any sort of healing. And what happens often is that somebody will, and again, it could be for any sort of diagnosis, but in particular, like with ADHD, is somebody will take the medication and feel a little bit better and think, okay, this is it, and this is what I needed. And then find that they still are struggling with some different things and think that the medication isn't working. And while a medication change or a change in dose or something like that might be beneficial, it's only going to be temporary, and it's only going to be to a certain degree because that wounding is still there. And in particular with this rejection sensitivity thing, when I was in this conversation, I said, I don't know that I've ever known a survivor, including myself, who hasn't struggled with rejection sensitivity. And now, of course, like with everything, there's a continuum, right? And some people are going to struggle a lot more than other people are going to struggle. And what that struggle looks like might be very different. How they respond to that struggle might be very different. But if you think about it, if you're a survivor, which I'm guessing you are if you're watching this, we have all, and I say this because everybody that I've ever known has struggled with this, again, to a degree. We've all struggled with fearing, believing that other people are going to think negative things about us, and it could be in every type of scenario in our life, potentially. We're going to fear not being good enough, because if we're not good enough, then other people are going to think something about that, right? They're going to have an opinion about us. They're going to leave us. They're going to fire us. They're going to, whatever it's going to be, right? Whatever we make ourselves think. Now, for some people, it is a little more on the mild side, where they're able to manage it and they're still able to do the things that they want to do. Though I would say for most survivors of childhood trauma, it's not that mild. It can create a lot of difficulty in potentially various ways. For some people, it might be more in one way versus another. Like for some people, it might be more about risk-taking in like a career or education, or trying new things. Other people, it might be really around relationships, or it might be a combination of things. But we all have that. And on the other end, that can look like what is often perceived or identified as one of the indicators of borderline personality disorder. So on that extreme end, it can be really intense, and it can leave people feeling like they want to take their own lives. It can lead people to become aggressive and violent and verbally abusive. Like it can be either one of those things, but it's an extreme response to that sort of rejection. And I think it's also important to recognize that rejection doesn't have to mean that somebody says, I don't want to be around you, or they end a relationship with you, or they fire you, or they don't hire you, or that kind of thing. Rejection can, to the person experiencing it, rejection can look a whole lot of different ways. And it actually may not be rejection at all, but it doesn't mean that it isn't experienced as rejection. And that's part of that kind of extreme sort of thing, right? That we can, when we do not believe in ourselves, when we believe that we are unworthy, undeserving, not good enough, when we believe that there is something so bad within us that it caused people to do things to us, when we believe that there must be something about us that is bad enough that it warranted punishment like that, we can't ever really believe that other people truly value us, that other people can truly, wholeheartedly enjoy us or love us. We may allow ourselves to think that maybe they do, but when we're in that vulnerable place, or if there's a disagreement, or somebody doesn't get back to you right away, immediately the fear can creep in there. And again, it might be relatively mild. You might be thinking, I wonder what's going on with that person. Or it could be extreme and anticipating the worst and avoid that person because you think that they must be thinking something horrible about you, right? And again, your response to that can be relatively mild, at least from the outside, or it could be really, really extreme and not at all appropriate from the outside. Internally, it could be the same. It could also look a little bit different, or certainly feel a little bit different. And I wanted to talk about this because we do search for answers. And if somebody has been searching for answers, maybe they've even tried therapy and it just didn't work for them for whatever reason, and they go and they get the diagnosis and they get the medication, so often they'll think, okay, and especially if they do begin to feel a little bit better, maybe some other symptoms tend to be a little bit less significant, or could even be potentially placebo, because that is a very real thing. And they think, okay, I'm doing better. This was it. And this is going to really help me in so many ways in my life. But what inevitably often happens, even if it is a genuine, accurate diagnosis and medication might be helpful, is all those beliefs that you're carrying around from the trauma, from the wounding, they're still there. No medication can change what you believe about who you are. Now, it can help, it can serve a bit of a purpose in helping all of those really negative thoughts and the energy behind them. It can help lessen that a little bit so that you can have more ability to connect to what is true and real and do the work and all of that. But that isn't going to heal the trauma. And so when you find that you're struggling again, or that you're not where you thought you should be or where you want to be, it reinforces those beliefs of not being good enough. And particularly if there are symptoms that you have associated with ADHD, a lot of the thoughts around that are around like not being good enough, not trying hard enough, not being strong enough. Especially if you had any of those sorts of symptoms as a younger person, whether it was like a hyperactivity sort of thing and you couldn't focus, or maybe just an inability to focus because your mind is so occupied with so many things that you don't even know that you have any thoughts going on in your mind. So when those things come back, it's reinforcing all those false things that you believe about who you are. It reinforces that if you've believed that you'll never be able to get better, or you'll never be able to experience something that you want to experience, that can then reinforce that. Because here you are, you thought you figured it out, you're doing the thing you're supposed to do, it helped for a little while, and now here you are again, which you take as evidence. And it's probably not the first thing that you've taken as evidence, but you take that as more evidence that it really is just you. And that is heartbreaking. Truly, it is, and I've seen this happen so many times. It is so incredibly heartbreaking. Because of that reinforcement, it deepens that belief that you have about who you are and what you're capable of, which makes it so much harder in a sense to kind of like crawl out of that hole, so to speak. Not that it is impossible, because it absolutely is, but it does create a lot more difficulty for a period of time. And so it is important to recognize, no matter what that diagnosis is, depression, anxiety, PTSD, an addiction, an eating disorder, certainly ADD or autism, I don't know, there are any other number of diagnoses, that even if you're doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing for that diagnosis, if you have childhood trauma that you have not yet healed, you'll continue to struggle. Sometimes maybe more than others. You may do really well for a period of time, whether that's a few months or even a few years. Though some of those struggles are going to come back up, maybe in a different way, because the medication does do something, right? It is doing something. So it may look or feel a little bit different, but that struggle in ultimately who you believe you are and what you're capable of and what you deserve in life, that is still going to be there. And with the rejection thing, right? Like if you take medication, and I've not directly heard anybody talk about this, so I don't know how this works in this way, but like if you take medication and you struggle with the rejection thing and the medication seems to maybe be helping a little bit, there will come a time, maybe it's in a more vulnerable relationship, maybe because you're more vulnerable generally, there's things going on in your life, maybe because you're up for a big promotion, or you're about to get married or divorced or something like that, that fear, even if the medication or the interventions you're doing for the ADHD are helping, there's a good chance you're going to find yourself feeling and experiencing some of that again. And I don't want you to let yourself believe that it's because you truly are bad, you truly are weak, you truly are incapable of healing, because that is not the reality. It is not. It's just that you are not doing the work of healing the wound. Because all trauma, and when I say trauma, I'm referring specifically to trauma, but I think it's also important to recognize it doesn't have to be what somebody might consider trauma. It could be just a lot of dysfunction in your childhood. It could be chaos. It could be a period of time that things were really unstable. It could be a parent that wasn't available emotionally or physically. Maybe you experience a lot of loss in your early life, and it could be like grandparents, so it doesn't have to be a traumatic sort of situation, but as a young child you don't have the capacity to really understand all of that, and that can create a lot of fear and anxiety. So anything from childhood that can create a wound, especially if it's an ongoing experience for any period of time, that wound is harder to heal. That needs attention. That needs healing. And if you do have a diagnosis of some sort of mental health issue, whether you're taking medication or not, keeping that in mind as you are doing the healing can be really important. And I would say is important to keep in mind, because they definitely overlap. Some of the symptoms, like somebody who has not experienced childhood trauma might have symptoms that somebody who doesn't have ADHD but has experienced childhood trauma, some of those symptoms are going to overlap. So just being able to recognize the various experiences in your life that may be contributing to certain struggles or issues, that is really, really important. And if you've watched any of my videos where I've talked about being a social worker, that is really one of the things that I found so kind of drawn. What drew me to being a social worker is being able to think about that we are an individual in an environment, and everything within that environment influences not necessarily just who we are and not necessarily every aspect of who we are, but it not only influences that, it influences how we experience things. It influences the kinds of things that we're impacted by. And when it comes to a mental health diagnosis and childhood trauma, even if that mental health diagnosis is a result of you telling somebody that you experienced childhood trauma, the childhood trauma is the root. That is the original wounding. Generally speaking, maybe there's something else that was an original wound that wasn't, well, probably still related to trauma if it created that kind of wound, but it may not be like abuse or that sort of thing. But if you're not addressing this wounding, then you're going to continue to have symptoms. And so I'm not suggesting that if you've been diagnosed or you think that you might have a diagnosis, to not pursue that. I would just encourage you to pursue that. And if you are already diagnosed, particularly if you're on medication or doing interventions related to that diagnosis, that you also recognize and do the work that is important for healing the trauma wound as well. So know that you're not alone. Know that there are a lot of mental health diagnoses that the symptoms overlap with what it means to be a survivor and the impact that is created. Know that even if other people are struggling in similar ways and they've done things that have helped them, there are a lot of factors that play into what you need and how your struggle might be showing up at any given time. So don't compare yourself to other people. And know that if you have the ability to watch this video and understand what I am talking about, that you have within you the capacity to heal and to manage, if you do have a mental health diagnosis, an accurate diagnosis of something, that you do have the ability certainly to heal the trauma. And in healing that trauma, it will help in the symptomology and the struggle of this other diagnosis as well. So I would love to hear from you, anything that you would like to share. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. If you found this helpful and maybe know somebody who might be struggling with any of this, please make sure to share it as well. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time.